Good morning and welcome to week 2 of City of Grande Prairie budget discussions for the 2015 to 2018 cycle. We're on to operating today. Just for the layout of the day, we'll probably take a break at about 10:15. We'll try to do our lunch around noon, and we'll be aiming to end today at about 4 o'clock. But to get us on our way, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ken Anderson, who's going to give us an introduction to the some of the work so far, the layout of administration's presentations for the day, and we'll get everything started. Ken. Sure. Councillor Rice, turn on your microphone.
Our intent to go to the tourism luncheon?
I think a variety of council members may be going different places, yeah. Okay. Ken.
Okay, thank you. I thought I'd start off by concluding from last week and closing that loop. So last week you were presented with a capital plan that had $171 million worth of funded projects for the 4-year period. Over the 2 days you made 32 changes to the projects. You added a net of $6.1 million to the projects. So we now have $177 million over the 4-year period, which is fairly aggressive when you consider that only $14 million is borrowed money for that project, for those projects. As far as the impact in the operating, we've funded it off within the capital plan, so there is no more transfer from operating to capital. However, it does limit ability over the next 4 years as far as emerging issues or other priorities that you may have. I mean, there could be changes in grant programs. They could go up. They could also go down based on current prices of energy. There's growth, and so there are factors that may lead to other funds over the 4-year period for projects, but there will be some challenges. If you find challenges, you may actually have to set priorities and unfund a project if you want to fund something else. So are there any questions on the capital side before I move to the operating?
Doesn't look like it, Ken. Go ahead.
Okay then. So we'll move into it. Here's the agenda for it's a 3-day period this time. And we'll start off with an economic review and forecast. I'll do some of it, and Brian will do the regional piece of it, the local piece. We'll look at the business plan history, the process, the strategy. And then we'll go through the service area presentations. It'll be the city manager, community living, community safety, community growth, and corporate services. You will find that the presentations are fairly brief because you have the binders with all the business plans in them. So based on last week, you may actually be able to get through all these presentations today while you flag away and deal with the flagged items tomorrow. You may.
And it looks like we have a question. Councillor Radburn.
Thank you, Ken. I'm just going back to your introduction, transition from capital to operational. When you talked about unfunding, were you suggesting that as we do our annual reviews, we may want to review decisions we made if other priorities come about, or were you suggesting we do that at the end of operational discussions?
No, what I'm suggesting is you do it during the cycle. If something comes up before the next annual review, you could do it at that time, or you could do it during the annual review that we do in the fall, but I'm not suggesting after this process at all.
Thank you.
See Councillor Rice.
So I guess, Ken, what my question would be, suppose we get to Friday and you say, okay, what you've got is an 8.3% increase, and we're saying, yeah, I'm not liking that a lot. We'll be able to go back or no?
Yes, you'll be able to go back if you want to give some direction to administration. We could go back and rework the numbers and bring it back to you if that's the decision you want to make. So it's your process, and you can proceed as you wish.
Okay.
I think what I understood Ken to say was that if there are emerging priorities over the course of the budget cycle that we're approving to 2018, there's something new that comes up, capital-wise in particular, but other new priorities, we may have to consider unfunding some projects that we approved today. So if something new comes up that's big that we want to do, given the fact that we've used a lot of grants and other sources of funding, we may have to make some decisions because there's additional money without increasing taxes to do those additional priorities.
That's correct. I mean, in prior plans, we had quite a bit of capacity built in, so it was quite easy for administration to do that. However, we've used, as I said, 177 million. 163 million of that is tax, grants, and reserves over the 4-year period. So as we move forward, there is a bit of capacity there for smaller projects, smaller additions that you may want to add, or if price changes in approved projects as well. But if there's new projects that arise or projects escalate cost-wise, then you may have to consider setting some priorities here and actually unfunding something or deferring it at least for a while.
Okay, thanks. I think that's essentially council. I think that's Ken's giving us the caution. The administration hasn't built a ton of flexibility into the plan. That's essentially what you're saying. So, okay. Go ahead, Ken.
We kind of lowered the capacity there because we know there's pressure on the operating side here, so we're trying to leave that one alone. So the next part of the agenda after the presentations by the service areas would be the council and committee referrals. We dealt with a bunch of them last week as far as concerning the ones for the community groups and the ones referred by council committee of the whole. They've been included here now. And as we go through that process up to that point, then you can flag items. And the intent would be to try and deal with the flagged items at that point tomorrow. If we could deal with all those items by the end of tomorrow, that would be good. Then on Friday morning, there are community group presentations. I've provided you with a list. I think there's 19 or 20 of them, or maybe less. They will come in the morning. They've been allowed 5 minutes each. Some may require a little more time, so probably that will take till noon. And then you can discuss those in the afternoon and any other items you want to talk about regarding the budget. And the intent would be on Friday to give you the impact of the tax of the 4-year period. As Councillor Rice said, if you get to a point where you're not comfortable with the tax amounts, then you can give direction to administration to do something else and bring it back again. It's your choice. It's your process. So we'll start on the global economic outlook. There has been changes from prior cycles. Prior global markets been driven by the emerging markets. It's turned more to the advanced markets that are tending to drive it a little better. So here's the world GDP growth over the next couple of years. There was a bit of a slowdown in the first quarter of this year, but the U.S. has picked it up quite a bit recently. There certainly is pressure in the EU as far as growth goes. I mean, it's a struggle there, but they're projecting 3.4% worldwide for 14. For 15, they're projecting 4.0%. That changes by the day, though. Policy rates are the rates set by the central banks. In Canada would be the Bank of Canada, and UK would be the Bank of England. And as you can see, when we had a blip in 2009, a bit of a recession there, they've held their rates fairly low. They can't go much lower in some cases. And the European Union just lowered their rates as well, and they're putting more stimulus into it because the Eurozone is not growing. So when you look at the advanced versus the emerging economies, so what are the advanced economies? The advanced economies include Canada, US, Western Europe, Australia, Japan, South Korea. The emerging ones are the traditional BRIC group, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And Russia's struggling now because of sanctions against it. There's also some new players in the emerging markets. It's Mexico and Turkey, and those are emerging as well. So you can see here that the emerging markets, the light line is actually is decreased a bit, and the dark blue, which is the advanced economies, is increasing slightly. But for sure, the emerging economies contribute much more than the advanced economies. And here's the emerging economies by country. You can see that China, still growing at about 7+%, has slowed down from its 10+%, but it has slowed. You can see the same thing for the other ones. I mean, they've all slowed to some degree, some more than others. As far as the advanced economies go, they've picked up relatively well. I mean, Canada and US have. The UK as well. The Euro area, that's probably changed. I mean, Germany is barely growing at the moment. And Japan just realized they had a recession, so they're struggling along too. As far as the U.S. economic outlook goes, the real GDP for the U.S. has improved significantly at the beginning of this year. They're projected to do, they had a 4.2% annualized gain in the second quarter. And there's been a lot of consumer spending that's been driving the economy as well. So they're doing quite well. However, if they can't do well in the Eurozone and Japan and other economies suffer, so there may be a struggle going forward with them as well. The unemployment rate you can see in 2009 when they had a recession has been coming down ever since. A better measure rather than unemployment rate is employment rate, because unemployment rate just is indicative of how many people are looking for a job at a specific period of time. It certainly isn't a downward trend. Interest rates, the bottom line there is the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank for the U.S. Projected that as the economy improves, that interest rates will go up. They're pretty rock bottom right at the moment. In the Canadian economic outlook, the U.S. economy is doing better, so Canada is doing better. As far as the depreciation of the Canadian dollar, that certainly has helped with exports as well. When you look at the exports by sector, you can see it's fairly commodity driven here, but there is some non-commodity growth as well. Meaning the U.S. investment is increasing due to their better economy. So there's equipment and software, for example, that's being provided to the U.S., which is helping the exports of Canada. The non-residential investment in Canada, up until recently, there's been a strong market in the energy side and that infrastructure. It's supposed to still carry on. Suncor has just indicated that they're increasing their amount of their investment as well. The labor market is improving. You can see the unemployment line going down and the actual employment, which is a better measure, is increasing. Here's Canada's real GDP. It's up, but it's questionable. It's driven a lot by the commodity sector, which is directly related to the economies of the other countries as well. So as their economies decrease, the commodity market tends to decrease as well. Unemployment rate, similar to what's happening in the States. You can see it's coming down. It's above the inflation safe range, which means if you go below that, you're going to make the demand for labor higher, which is going to drive inflation up. For inflation, the Bank of Canada rate, or their target, is 2%. We're around the 2% mark now. And here are the interest rates. You can see them starting to trend upward as we improve the economy. Dollar, well, that's kind of tanked recently. It's good for exports, not so good for imports. Not good for travel. We're down to about 87, I believe it is now.
Ken, can I just ask a question on this with the Canadian dollar? So in terms of the local economy, the natural resource sector, that's a positive. So if it's wood products or pulp products or natural gas that is exported to the States, then that's a positive for them because they can sort of sell more. But on the city's operations, what impact would that have on the cost of goods that the city might purchase, playground equipment or other kinds?
Well, anything that's priced in U.S. dollars would cost us more. If it's manufactured within Canada, there could be an increase as well because the demand will grow in the U.S. market for it due to the depreciated dollar.
So would it be fair to say, would it be a fair interpretation to say that a decreased Canadian dollar would be good for local exports, but for some of the goods that the City of Grande Prairie may use in its operations, it could have a increase to those costs?
Correct. There's pros and cons to the depreciated dollar. Depends which sector you really lie in.
Okay, thank you.
So the Alberta Economic Outlook, these slides are about a month and a half old. There's probably some modification happening here with the depressed energy sector. You can see that the employment growth by province is being led by Alberta. Saskatchewan has similar resources, so they're going in the same way. And you can see the unemployment rate is Saskatchewan and Alberta kind of lead the way. I mean, the employment rate can be good and bad. The employment rate or the unemployment rate becomes so low that you get into the inflation area. I mean, you're going to drive up costs, and it becomes, and a few years ago we had great difficulty just finding staff for the city, as did any other business in the city. So find a nice balance can be difficult. If you look at the population growth by province, it's being, of course, led by Alberta as well, just it's driven a lot by the energy sector. And the net migration, what's happening in Eastern Canada, the economy isn't very good. Ontario's lost a lot of manufacturing. The East Coast has been depressed for quite some time. So there's a lot of people coming from the east to the west. Housing starts have gone up since 2009 when we had the blip. They're kind of leveling off now. Expected to level off. Well, here's a slide that's changed recently. Shows the West Texas Intermediate oil prices. We're sitting at 92. We're down to about 76, I believe, today. And Suncor is predicting that going through next year that prices will remain below 80. However, we do have a depressed dollar, which is offsetting some of that. There's the provincial real GDP growth. Alberta again leading the way, somewhat dependent on how energy prices and Canadian dollar do. It's leading Canada. The gas prices have been decreased for a number of years now. About 5+ years ago they were quite high, but they've gone down significantly. And the whole thing with oil and gas is it's a supply and a demand issue. There's much more supply now with shale oil, shale gas. Because the economies of other countries, for example, China is the second largest. China is the second largest economy. As it decreases, of course, the demand for resources also decreases. And Japan is the third largest economy, and they're not doing well either. So it's a supply and demand issue for both of these, natural gas and oil. Unemployment rate in Alberta and Canada, the bottom line being Alberta, the top line being Canada. So you can see we're below the national average. The real GDP in Alberta, you could see in 2009 there was the blip. We had a bit of a recession. It's improved ever since. The line there is the Canada rate, and you can see that Alberta is leading the national average. So what I'm going to do is transfer it over to Brian, who's going to do a regional and local perspective. We'll jump seats.
Brian, just before you get started, Ken, can you maybe pull down that microphone so it isn't pointing to the speakers above? Thanks very much. Go ahead, Brian.
All right, so we'll talk a little bit more local here for the rest of the morning. That's going to concentrate on Grande Prairie specifically and a little bit of Division 19. And Division 19 is, if you want to look at it on a map, it's more or less from the Wapiti River north, a little bit past the Peace River to Fairview, Peace River, and that's kind of the containment. Over to the east is Valley View, and then to the BC border. So we'll start off looking at employment growth. So this is a little bit of a messy chart, but it does show the economy over the last 6 or 18 years in Grande Prairie specifically. This is what our job market has looked like. So the red lines on there are part-time jobs, the blue lines are full-time jobs, and the green line that goes up and down is the monthly unemployment rate. So you can see kind of where the booms and the busts have happened, recessions and have happened over the last 18 years, and you can see the The previous boom where we converted a lot of part-time jobs into full-time jobs going the early 2000s into 06, 07, and you can see when kind of the recession started in 08 and 09, where we started to convert full-time jobs into part-time jobs. And then in May 2010, things again flipped around where we created almost 6,000 jobs in the span of 12 months for full-time jobs. And the reason why that's important is that full-time jobs are considered to be of a higher quality than part-time jobs because you make more money, typically they're more stable, and you have better benefits. And just even in the last 5 years, there's been about 8,000 new jobs in total that have been created just in Grande Prairie. So the next thing, this is looking at our growth over the last 90 years in Grande Prairie and just compared to Alberta and Canada. For the last 90 years, we've averaged 4.5% compounded annual growth, which is off the charts. And if you look at what that looks like on an overall basis, Canada has been about 1.5% over that same period, which is 280% growth. Grande Prairie's 5,000% growth over that period of time. Right now, and I'll show in the next couple slides here on where that growth is coming from. This is a look at what the major components of Grande Prairie's immigration and migration is. So we'll start off at the top in these dark blue lines, or dark blue segment there. That's interprovincial migration. So anybody coming from outside of Alberta. The next biggest source of growth we have right now is births. In our area, we're over 2,000 births a year. And on the negative side, for where we lose people, obviously every year we have deaths in and around the 550 to 600 range in our division. And intra-provincial migration, these are people that are leaving Grande Prairie to go somewhere else in Alberta. And the yellow line that you see going through is the net change. So since 2001, 2002, we have not had a single net negative year. We have always increased in population. So this is looking at this graph in a slightly different way, along with a couple projections here of where I think population is right now. So in 2013 and 14, these are my projections based on the migration trends that we have seen. 2013 is a little bit more of a solid number than 14 is because we don't have the most recent numbers on that. But if I'm close, we're probably sitting at 64,000 people in 2014 in Grande Prairie. Part of that number is trying to look at census net undercoverage, and all that is a fancy way of saying people that were missed in the census that aren't included in that number. So this is a breakdown of our population in 5-year intervals, and you can see our core population here is 20 to 35. I like to throw in 15 to 35, and the reason I say that is kind of as an aside to this graph. Occasionally we get beat up a little bit on crime rates in Grande Prairie, but some people don't realize that approximately 70% of all crime is committed by people between the ages of 15 and 35, and that is our core demographic in the city. The next biggest concern I think we have in Grande Prairie is that 0 to 4. There are more people under the age of 5 than there are over the age of 65 in the city, and that creates some unique challenges for us, and especially the school system over the next 10 years, is that wave every year the next grade faces probably another school. So this is trying to put a little bit of substance to what you're seeing in the last graph. I'll just flip back so you can see the core demographics, that 20 to 35, and this is the immigration we see interprovincially. So this is a split between males and females here, but just in that 20 to 24 age range, we probably got 850 plus people last year that moved from across Canada to Grande Prairie and area, but predominantly Grande Prairie, that are in that demographic. And you can see again that kind of that core 15 to 35 is who's immigrating to the city. This is who we're losing from the area. Kind of the same demographic, but a little bit stronger trend in female. I would suggest that's probably post-secondary education. that's causing some of that kind of 15 to 25 intra-provincial migration, but we don't have specific data. As this is a net number, we don't know how far to the positive and how far to the negative it goes with these numbers. This is just what happens in the net result. So this is what, so when we look at Division 19, these are the major towns and cities. Well, we're the only city of the major towns as well that are in here, and what their demographics look like and how we relate to the other communities. You can see again, this is kind of a different way of showing the same data as I showed last time, but again, that 20 to 40 range is our core demographic. You can see our neighbors in the county, it's inverted in that, where they have a lot less of their residents are in that 20 to 40 range. And the rest of the communities are a little bit more balanced as they're more established. And actually, except for the county, the city, and Sexsmith, the other communities listed on here have seen population declines over the last 10 years.
See, Councillor McLean has a question.
Question, Ryan, on the county. Would you say their numbers are inflated a bit from a lot of residents living right on our border, like Wedgwood, 1,400 people and stuff? Demographic, their age demographic could be, a lot has to play with that, how their people are moving actually here, but right on our border. It's not rural, it's more urban. Their age limit.
I'm not sure if I could take too much from the county data. It's the entire county that age demographic is made up of, which obviously extends to a much larger area. I don't know if I could give you a good answer on
that. Play with their numbers for a lot of residents right on our border, like 7,000 residents probably there's 5,000 or 6,000.
There's definitely a lot of development adjacent to the city, but I don't think I could make too many comments on that.
Okay, that's right.
Moving on here to the new schools that have been announced in Grande Prairie and one adjacent to Grande Prairie in Whispering Ridge. So over the next 3 years, we're likely to see 4,650 new spots open up for schools in Grande Prairie and directly impacting Grande Prairie. So this is kind of the impact on our housing market over the last 20 years, 21 years, and it correlates highly with our immigration. When we have immigration come in, our rents go up dramatically and our vacancies go down significantly as well. And right now we're back in that. There's quite a bit of, there is some supply that's coming on. We've got a couple new apartment buildings that'll open up in the next couple months here. We'll take a little bit of the pressure off. However, some of the companies in our area still have relatively aggressive expansion plans, especially in the oil and gas side. Obviously take that with a small grain of salt with the oil prices and energy prices that have fluctuated a little bit in the last month. But it looks like we're going to see continued pressure on housing probably for at least the next year or two until some supply catches up with the demand. So the next 4 points here, the Montney and the Duvernay, these are two of the oil and gas fields in our area that are driving a lot of the activity. The Montney kind of extends into Alberta to our west and to the south of Grande Prairie. The major portion of the Montney is in British Columbia and the Dawson Creek, Fort St. John, Chetwynd area. However, a lot of the activity in the Montney that's occurring is on the Alberta side. A lot of you will be familiar with Seven Generations Energy, who recently had their initial public offering here. Their capital plan in the area for this drilling season is about $1.6 billion and 15 drilling rigs, which just for kind of a visualization of what one drilling rig means, the Canadian Association of Oil Well Drilling Contractors estimates about 120 people are needed to operate one drilling rig. So if you have 15 operating, you're looking at probably 1,700 people that are needed to operate it, or 18. So the Duvernay, this is a play that kind of starts in the Fox Creek area, goes to Drayton Valley and extends into central, kind of north central Alberta. The Montney and the Duvernay are both considered to be two of the top 5 plays in North America, and a lot of what is being explored in both those plays are serviced out of Grande Prairie, given our geographic location and the amount of service companies that have made their home base in our area. The main things that are driving them are liquids production, and liquids are things like condensate, butane, propane, ethane, and a number of other anes that are out there, but those are kind of the more important ones. And the reason why condensate is an important liquid is that it's used to dilute bitumen, and that allows it to flow through pipelines and to be loaded onto rail cars for transport to other markets. The last point is liquefied natural gas, or LNG. This is another major opportunity for Alberta, British Columbia, and Canada in general. The prices in Canada and the United States are relatively depressed or moderate for the price of natural gas, in around $4.50. The prices in Europe and Asia are a completely different story. In Japan, for example, they're looking at $17 natural gas, a factor of 4 higher than what we face here. And that's kind of the business case that's being built around liquefied natural gas export, is that we can get our affordable gas liquefied and shipped across to Asia and get a premium for our product here, which the fields that will service this LNG export will be the Montney, the Duvernay, and the Horn River. And the Horn River is in the Fort Nelson area, which will also have significant impacts on Grande Prairie, as our service companies and our professional services, like our lawyers and accountants, will also have clients and be working in those areas as well.
See, Councillor Radburn has a question.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. Brian, will the end result for us be greater opportunities for industrial attraction? Is that realistic?
Yes, as LNG occurs, there will be significant demands for additional products. So we produce X amount of natural gas right now that gets shipped around the continent, as it's a continental commodity currently, because we don't get it to Tidewater. If we were to have LNG occur, you could be looking at up to, I think, 4 billion cubic feet a day of production, which would be, I think, a 40% increase in Alberta's production. And the fields that would be providing that gas would be serviced by Grande Prairie companies. So yes, there would definitely be increased demand for industrial land.
So the sooner we can have land available, the better. Is that fair?
Yeah, the sooner that we have land that companies can start making plans around, so that when they do expand, that they have land available or that they've already purchased, is definitely an important factor.
Councillor McLean also has a question.
I never heard nothing about Peace River. I know they're busing people to camps now from our airport with the oil play Shell and that. What about Peace River?
Yeah, Peace River is definitely going to have an impact, and that is the Carmen Creek development that Shell is doing. I know that they had at one point talked about 5,000 people to do the construction of that project with a much smaller operating contingent once the plant was up and running. It will have an impact. We have recently spoken with Shell, and it sounds like they might be slowing down a little bit and not being quite as aggressive as they originally thought with the construction of that facility. But it will no doubt have an impact on our labor, our trades, things like our distribution. So the Cisco's and Gordon Food Products of the world, they have to ship food to the camps. We have the airport, obviously, that's bringing in flights and all the professional services that go along with that development.
Thanks, Brian.
So this is just looking again, I commented a little bit about the natural gas price differences. This chart's just a little bit older than I would like, but it still represents the trend. So you see North America in the blue on the bottom. Again, we're sitting around $4.50 for natural gas. Europe's in and around the $12 range, and Japan again is sitting 16-ish on this. It's currently about $17.50 in October. So it's increased. Japan's just recently announced they're in a recession. Whether that decreases demand in that, I'm not sure. The thing with Japan is that they're decommissioning a lot of their nuclear power plants, and they are converting to natural gas. So even if they are in a recession in other countries that have decided to go away from nuclear and go to natural gas, there should be demand that comes in to replace some of that fuel that's not being spent on uranium. So I borrowed these graphs from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers that made a presentation to Council here in the summer. These are the two cases that they feel are representative of the Alberta market. The market constrained case, the main assumptions here are that LNG exports do not occur. If LNG exports do not occur, they're forecasting a moderate decline or a slight decline in the production of natural gas, with an uptick kind of in the mid 2020s. The new market opportunity case essentially is the opposite of that. They're assuming in this case that LNG exports will occur and we'll see a moderate increase in production of natural gas. So a moderate increase in this case might be a couple percent a year, but the difference is that couple percent a year is going to come largely from our area. So what a couple percent increase overall is a huge increase for the area where the production comes from. So this could be a quite a significant increase in activity from our area. Kind of conclude here with and touch a little bit on Councillor Radburn's comment on industrial land and where we might have some of that. This is a project, the 116th Street Sewer Trunk, that Council recently approved funding for of $4 million, with the balance to be funded off by Aquaterra and a private partner. This will open up about 1,600 hectares of land for the city, and about 55% of that will be commercial and industrial land, with the balance being residential. This land is kind of strategically located on the west end. It's close to the airport. It's close to Highway 43, so trucks can get up to speed relatively quickly. They can be at highway speeds in less than 5 minutes from pretty much any industrial park that will be built in that area. As well, they're located between both county industrial parks, so there's some good location for distribution between the two. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Council, any questions for Brian before we let him go? So here's some kudos for the presentation, guys. Certainly helpful. So it looks like Councillor Tarrant maybe has a question.
Yeah. Brian, just could you maybe talk about housing starts locally?
Yep. So locally here, our housing starts are this year actually split, relatively balanced between multifamily and single family. Just last month alone, I believe we had 200 multifamily starts. We were projected to probably balance or to end off the year at around 600, 650 starts for the year, depending on what permits get put in here over the next 2 months. But it's a little bit higher than last year. There has not been the same amount of building that we saw back in the 2006-2007 period, where we saw up to 1,200 housing starts occur in 1 year. And why that is, I can't give you a great answer other than possibly a little bit less risk-taking and some of the policies from CMHC on what loans they will insure. They've taken a lower risk approach to funding, especially multifamily and apartment starts, where I won't get into a lot of the technical reasons for what that is, but essentially the return on investment that they look at doesn't work well with new construction for them to fund the loans, which decreases the amount of people that can then get funding and build.
And also, could you comment on sort of the forecast for commercial? Sorry, in terms of retail specifically.
Okay, and is there anything specifically that?
I don't know if you can just give us sort of indication of what sort of demand is for some of the new retail and?
Sure. Kind of looking at the retail market analysis that we did for the city back in this spring, the city services a trading area of about 260,000 people, which is dramatically higher than what obviously the city and our immediate population would suggest, as the city's, by my numbers, about 64,000 people. The county, again, you got about 22,000 people in the county. So really we're looking at a population of 86,000, and that's what a lot of the companies that look at a market look at. They look at this, they either look at a small radius around a population center, or they look at the driving times, how long it takes people to get there. The uniqueness of our market is that a lot of people don't have much of a choice. If you want to go to Costco, you either have to come to Grande Prairie or you have to drive to Edmonton or Prince George, which for a lot of people, we have a significant time advantage to come here as opposed to driving an additional 4 hours in any one direction. So when you start looking at that, our trading area expands dramatically from what a lot of companies would look as a 50-kilometer radius is suddenly a 200-plus kilometer radius where we have, and that's where we get our 260,000. So currently we have about 4 million square feet of retail space in the city. For just kind of easy numbers, you can look at every person that moves to Grande Prairie requires about 30 to 40 square feet of retail to support their lifestyle. So every time, so if you look over the last year, we had about 4,000 people move to Grande Prairie. So there's another 120 to 160,000 square feet of retail demand that's been created just over the last year. And to put that into perspective, that would be probably 2 Costco's in space.
Thanks, Brian. I don't see any other questions. So I guess we're ready to go on to the next section, Ken.
Okay, so I thought I'd start off giving you a bit of history around business planning, since some of you are newer. Up until and including the year of 2002, we used to do one-year business planning and the budget as well. And it required significant resources by staff. It focused on short-term goals and objectives. It turned into a process of a lot of planning and really limited the amount of time you had to implement a plan. So then we started exploring going to multi-year business planning. So in 2003 and 4, we did a 2-year just to get into it, find out if there were any issues around it. It was successful. And then we got into 2005 to 7, we did a 3-year plan. And the 3-year plan actually coincided with the council. So at the end of the council term was the final year of the business plan, which created a huge challenge for people coming new to council, because as soon as they came new, they had about 1 month to learn everything and do a 3-year business plan. So what we did was we took the 3-year for the following cycle and added a year. We did a leap over the 1 year so that new councilors can have a chance to learn it for a year, and then they can have much more knowledgeable when it comes time to set the 3-year plan. So we did it 2012 and 14. We did that staggered approach again for the 3-year. And with the recent changes in the mandate of council to 4 years, we've gone that same way. Now here's a graph showing the historical tax increases all the way from 2003 to the current. Until the early 2000s, the city wasn't doing a lot of construction projects. Back in the 70s, 80s, the city was started getting into the land development business, and the energy sector fell apart in Alberta. And the city had significant debt at that point. So the focus for probably 20 years, up until around 2000, was to pay down that debt. So there was limited construction of new facilities. So there was a huge pent-up demand when you get to the beginning of the 2000s. And in the early 2000s, it started to grow fairly significantly, and the economy was starting to do well, and there was a lot of demand for other services from local government. So consequently, we built a number of facilities, we expanded programs, and we went government, you could see up until around 2009, we've had some significant tax increases. Up until just about 2009, people were willing to do that because they were willing to pay for the services. However, there was a bit of a blip in 2009, and the economy did a bit of a change, and there wasn't such a demand. The tax rates became more important than the service provision. So there was a slowdown over the last few years. You can see there's been a moderation. It's been 4 and below for the last 5 years. Here's the business planning process. In April, Council, you set your strategic plan. And then what we do is we take that plan and we drive down in the plan. So CLT came up with an operational plan at the same time, which took it down to the next degree. And then we presented that along with a council plan to departments, and they went away and did their business planning of how they're going to meet the needs of the council strategic plan. What we did was we did a targeted staff increase approach this time. In the past, we've had other models that weren't the best. So what we did was we had departments go away and document what their needs were and what would happen if they didn't have those staff resources met. So that went forward, and it was a fairly good process, actually. It was decided by CLT in June. They went through all those requests, and they determined tentatively which positions should be added to the business plan for the 4-year period. So then departments went away, they did all that, and they did their budgeting for the 4-year period in July and August. They presented those plans to CLT in October. Some of them had to come back and present a couple more times, but we finally got there.
And just when you say that some departments may have had to come back and present a couple of more times, why would that be? Did the administration ask those departments to make any changes?
Well, we were looking for further information regarding their requests. Some of the amounts did not look correct to us, so they had to go back and do a better rework and come back and present it again.
Thank you.
Our business planning process, our planning principles. As I mentioned last week, we need to balance the resource requirements for operational capital plans. And as I said last week, capital tax is just property tax that we transfer over to the capital plan. So if you transfer it over there, you limit the ability in this plan. Our target was to do 2 to 4% per year tax increase, which we were at a few weeks ago, until we found one error. Plus, last week, council decided to increase the community group funding for some, which increased it as well. As I mentioned, we did targeted staff increases. We've adjusted for inflation by the expense type, as opposed to just doing a general factor, because each service or supply has different factors that drive inflation. We've also built in a general contingency for each of 2016, 17, and 18, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Other issues going forward, there's the risk, the usual and unusual risk, which I will discuss in the next slide. The number of facilities, as the city grows, the number of facilities grow. We have new playgrounds, we inherit new buildings, we build new buildings, and sometimes don't get rid of the old buildings. So there's always an increase in the number of facilities. As far as staffing goes, the current cycle that we're in, there was essentially a staff freeze for hiring. That was due to a couple of revenue issues that we had going into this cycle and the desire to keep the tax increase low. So there is a bit of a pent-up demand. I mean, the city hasn't stopped growing, but the city additions were essentially frozen for a 3-year period. So the risk, the unusual risk. There's been a lot of recent talk regarding the East Link Center and some of the financial issues they're currently experiencing. So I want to tell you how we handled that in this budget. I don't want you to think that because they have a shortfall in the current year that we're adding that shortfall back and increasing their budget. We're not doing that at all. We believe that there is the ability to enhance revenue and reduce expenditure to curtail all or most of their deficit as is. So there's no additions, there's no new tax resources going in to correct that situation. We are looking at doing an operational review in early 2015. We know that there will be some transition to the new operating model. So we've allowed for a $500,000 one-time contingency for 2015 to deal with the transition as well as any one-time adjustments that is required for the Eastlink Center. But they will stay within the 2014 funding envelope, which will be adjusted for inflationary factors, but that's the only thing they'll be adjusted for. The usual risk that we have is that as you go further and further out, it becomes a bit more unknown. So what we've done traditionally with business planning cycles is from year 2 and beyond, we build in a general contingency. And the general contingency is for the purpose of dealing with emerging issues that you want to deal with, as well as external factors that we have no control over, we need to adjust for. So for each year of 16, 17, and 18, there's $500,000 in each year for that. If there is no need for it, if there are no emerging issues, if there are no external factors, then that will just be offset the tax reduction for the current year. So it's not going to be used unless it needs to be used.
Ken, just with that contingency for 16, 17, and 18, can you speak to really roughly what that is as a percentage of the city's overall operational budget?
$500,000 equates to about 0.5%.
So within the city's budget, we've got about 0.5% contingency built in.
Correct. The numbers that you would see will have 0.5% built in for 16, 0.5 for 17, and 0.5 for 18. So the numbers that you see for projected tax increases could modify dependent on the situation when we get to that year. We also include in the contingency future wage increases. We have 3 essential bargaining units. We have QP, which has a contract until the end of 15. We have Grande Prairie Firefighters Association, which has a contract which expires at the end of this year. And we have the out-of-scope staff, which doesn't have a contract per se. They do have guidelines and employment standards, but essentially that's expired at the end of this year too. So what we do for wage increases, for QP wages, we know what the factor is going to be for 15. So departments use that factor to adjust their budgets accordingly. We keep the out-of-scope GPFA for next year in contingency, and as adjustments are made, we pull from that. So that's where we keep it. We make an estimate of where they're going to land, and sometimes we're close, sometimes we have a surplus, and sometimes we may be slightly off. So that's the way we do it. As far as other issues in the cycle go, in the community groups, we decided last week that those organizations and those funding referred by Council Committee of the Whole will be built in. So this budget does reflect that. The organizations referred by other committees were funded at the 2014 amount. Those are in here. And some of those people will come forward on Friday morning to discuss it. And some of the ones that were funded through Council Committee of the Whole that they want to talk about their funding amount will also come forward. And those group appeals happen on Friday, as I mentioned. So here are the tax increases in this plan at this point. 2015, it's 4.5%. 2016, it's 4.5%. 2017, it's 4.5%. And in 2018, it drops to 3.8%. What does that mean to the average home? The average residential assessment in city is $335,000. So the municipal tax increase for this would be in 2015 an increase of $144. 2016 an increase of $150. 2017 an increase of $157. And in 2018 an increase of $139.
See a question, Councillor Tarrant.
Ken, what is the average tax bill then? So the average assessment is 335,000. What does that work out?
The municipal piece would be around the 3,000, just over $3,000 mark. So before we go into the service area presentations, do you have any questions about anything so far?
Sure. See another one, Councillor Radburn.
Thank you, Mayor Given. So Ken, tell us how the economic forecast information that you and Brian shared informed some of the assumptions that you've put into the budget.
Well, we see the potential for some significant growth here. It's being tempered, though, by world economies. So we see some moderate levels of growth here. And when we get to the business plan for the finance department, I'll talk to you about our assumptions around growth, assessment growth.
Okay.
So we do see opportunities here, but there certainly are risks. Energy, commodities, and any commodity is a very volatile market. And we have no control over the demand of it. We don't have any control over the supply of it, which is causing issues at the moment as well. But we're not feeling that there's going to be a downturn here. The economy is doing quite well here at this point, and we anticipate that continuing.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
One of the problems with the growth is that when people come, they don't bring their own roads and whatever. So in our budget planning, we have to plan and spend the money ahead of the growth. I mean, people say, well, the growth should pay for, but we have to build ahead of that. So has that been all factored into the budget?
Yes, you're quite correct. That has been factored in as well. When people come, some people think that they pay taxes and that should match the costs associated with it. As I mentioned last week, that doesn't line up that way. As far as residential housing goes, the taxes do not offset the true costs required. However, commercial property is a one-to-one, and industrial property, there's quite a difference. The revenue far surpasses the costs of servicing the industrial area. And when you get people here, you hit certain plateaus where you have major expenditures. You could go along fine for a few years, but for example, you have to build another $70 million arena for something. So those plateaus occur every once in a while. So there is no correlation between somebody buying a house and the house matching the costs of what it requires for the municipality.
Councillor McLean.
Just Ken, you just brought up about residential. I was looking at the chart here, but I remember last council we had a chart. Is there a way that chart can be brought up about the residential? You were just speaking to that. And I know it's in here somewhere, maybe it's further down. Residential taxes and commercial taxes and industrial. The difference, what we have percentage-wise. Yeah. It's like 80% residential.
Oh, how much of the city's tax base is residential?
Chart we got here somewhere.
I don't think that was in the slide presentations today.
Well, it should have been.
It was a speaking note last week that I talked about.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Ken, a typical measure that some organizations suggest government budgeting should be done on is inflation plus population growth. And although there's some debate about whether that's a reasonable measure or not, and it may be a bit of a conservative measure, if we were considering inflation plus population growth, what would that work out to in our area?
Well, the Bank of Canada target rate is 2% inflation. We're near that nationally. However, as you saw from the economic forecast regarding the rest of the country, the economy is doing much better in Alberta than it is doing nationally. You know, what goes along with that is a higher inflation cost because of the resource requirements, and the supply starts to dry up. So I would suspect that the inflation is probably closer to 3 than it is to 2. And you heard from Brian about the population changes, and it's probably in 3% per year. So you add the factor of inflation of 3 and the population growth of 3, and you're at 6%.
Thanks, Ken. Any further questions? I don't see anybody else in the queue, so I think we're ready to go on to the next stage. We did mention that about quarter after or 20 after we would take a break, so we'll try and get in at least one service area, just a small one. City manager's service area is the next up, and I think Mr. Sherbach, you're going to go around and take the presenter's table. This gives council an opportunity to switch to the city manager's tab in whichever binder they wish to choose. But Greg, I know you also have some slides that you're going to guide us through.
Yes, I do.
Take it away.
Thank you, Mayor Given, and good morning, everyone. I'll be covering off 4 budget areas: the City Manager's Office, Human Resources, Health, Wellness, and Safety, and Staff Learning and Development. Okay, we can show the slide, the first one, on key services. That's not it. So in terms of the city manager's area, my job is or council sets policy for the city, and my job is to lead the implementation staff, implementing council's policy. We support mayor and council and the things that we do. We act as a resource for the organization and the community. We do a lot of liaison work with community groups. We also undertake business enhancement reviews of the organization work groups, which is something that started last year. We also propose in this budget cycle to conduct policy research for council and to also coordinate advocacy efforts for council, and I'll speak to that later on. So in terms of the city manager's office budget, you can see in 2014 it was around $873,000. It drops in 2015 to $843,000, and then there's a slight increase each year to 2018. The reason for the drop in from 2014 to 15 is that at one time the city manager's office was providing a top up to the rent at Center 2000, and that now has been shifted to Director Roth's area. So that'll be in his budget, top up rent. That's right. Yes, you're right. It comes out of my pocket and goes into Gary's pocket. So in this budget for the city manager's office, we have included a position to help city council on policy research and advocacy. So in effect, there has been a true drop in the city manager's budget because we're adding another position. Also in 2018, you'll see that there's recruitment costs have been added. Council typically hires an external consulting firm to undertake a recruitment process for a city manager. So that's budgeted for 2018. Yeah. You'll be increasing the taxes though in 2015 if you do that. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the rent for Center 2000 was moved to Gary's area.
So, Councillor Rice, every time you ask a question without your microphone on, nobody else can hear you except those of us in the room. So I'd ask you to do that. If you have a question, please ring in. So did you have a question?
When do we flag stuff?
I guess we would, as we go through, we'd ask council members to flag specific items so that we can discuss them. I think we'll continue with the same process. If it isn't flagged, then it's assumed to be in, and council members can choose to flag things that are presented, or if there's things, I suppose, that aren't presented, but council has an interest in, we could do that as well. So, Councillor Rice, do you have something?
Yeah, I'd like to flag the advocacy position.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Rice. That item is flagged.
Okay, moving on to our
And you can turn your microphone off now, Councillor Rice.
Moving on to our next area, it's human resources. And the key services of our human resources department are employee and labor relations, learning and development, recruitment. They assist, basically they act as a consultant to our department heads, managers, and supervisors. They provide a lot of help because we have a very decentralized human resources model compared to other cities that have a very centralized model. So they provide the department heads, managers, supervisors with advice and guidance on how to do various things like recruitment, retention, and performance management, all those types of things. HR is also responsible for lead the health, wellness, and safety area, our compensation and benefits programs, dealing with conflict resolution, and any compliance that's required in legislation, whether it's with health and safety, WCB, human rights, employment standards, that type of thing. In terms of their budget is proposed to increase 2014 level to 2015 by around $65,000. Again, another increase in 2016 and going forward. In terms of why the increases, if you recall back in 2012 to 14, we also did a 5% reduction of budgets, and some of the areas in HR that were reduced by that 5%, they found that they just couldn't deal with that reduction, and so they've put those back in. They've also, to help with that, they've adjusted some other of their expense items, so they've reduced things like stationery, general supplies, phone. But in terms of the, like for example, there's been an increase in labor relations costs in terms of getting legal advice from, for example, we have a law firm that we deal with that we get legal advice from for HR kind of issues. Those costs have definitely gone up over the last couple of years, and so it's reflected in here. In terms of
Council members, I have a number of people in the queue. I was going to wait until on this area, and so I was going to wait until Greg presented the staffing requirements. So he's presented the numbers, a little bit of background, hasn't started talking about the staffing requirements. I imagine people want to talk about that kind of stuff. So, Councillor Rice, if this isn't about that, can you turn your microphone on?
Do we subscribe to the AUMA's legal services where you can access legal advice at a much reduced price?
Absolutely, we do. We do use that service. However, for some of the specialty kind of work, AUMA doesn't provide that information. That's when we have to go to Brownlee.
Okay.
So, go ahead, Greg, and finish
So,
the HR area.
So you did mention earlier, Mayor Given, about the staff increases, and there is a proposal in this area for staff increase in 2016 and another one in 2018. The way our HR department is organized, we have 5 people in the department. Actually, I have a slide on that. Let's maybe if I can get to that slide. You know what? It's coming up in a couple slides from now. If maybe we could just cover off some of the other things before I get to that particular slide. There's health, wellness, and safety. And that is our budget for we have health and safety teams across the city. We do not have a health and safety position or a health and safety coordinator position. Rather, we have a decentralized team model where each sort of work area has a health and safety team, and we provide them with small amounts of money to help them with the health and safety items. Now, the big increase in 2016 is actually we hire an external consulting firm to do the health and safety audit. And that's what that cost is, the increase, and you can see it drops back down again. So it's a pretty level budget over the years. It's just for every, I think, 3 or 4 years we have to do one of these external safety audits, which in turn we get a WCB rebate for, which is a good thing. And the other area is the staff learning and development, and we've actually dropped that particular item. You see the current level of funding for it is 1.2 million. And that's been dropped down to 1 million over the next 4 years. We do use pretty close to the 1.2. So we are looking at our staff learning and development budget to be capped at 1 million over the next budget cycle. And I believe it's the next slide. Yes, here it is. That talks about the additional resources. What we have in HR right now is we have an HR manager / consultant position. We have 3 HR consultants and 1 HR admin assistant. So that's the department. What they're proposing in HR is to create a sort of an in-between position. It's a lower pay band position than the HR consultant, but it's above the HR assistant assistant position. So it's like a junior consultant position, and that's intended to do things, the more day-to-day kind of work. The HR consultants involve the really high-level kinds of issues with when there's staff conflict issues or there's labor relations, those type of things, corporate-wide kind of initiatives. Whereas what the proposed in the HR advisor would do would be more of the, for example, helping department managers with recruitment or with performance management or some of those kinds of things that they would do on a more regular basis, providing advice at that kind of a level. So the proposal is to create this HR advisor position in 2016 and another one in 2018. And as you can see, in terms of our, we did a bit of a survey with other cities, and our HR department, because of the model we use, of a consultant approach as opposed to HR as the gatekeeper approach, we have much fewer HR staff than a city like Red Deer, for example, or Lethbridge, or Strathcona, or Medicine Hat.
Okay, so I do see those folks in the queue. Thanks for holding your questions, everybody. We'll start with Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. Just I'm going to red flag the HR advisory positions, and I had two questions. One for Greg was about the health and safety. Every year we get a WCB rebate. If you can present that to us when we're red flagging, we can discuss it. I'd just like to know, every year it changes what we get for the rebate from the government.
I do have that information with me right now.
Okay, I'd like to have that.
So, for example, in 2011, the WCB rebate was $141,960. In 2012, it was $59,581, and in 2013 was roughly $345,000.
I sort of want to flag this because I believe I'd like to make a motion, not right now, but basically we have safety committee, and where does that money go when we get it? General revenue or general venture, or?
I can provide some historical information about that. About 2 councils ago, I believe it was 2 councils ago, prior to that, the WCB rebates went into the health and safety program. About a couple councils ago, it was decided that the WCB rebates would go back into general revenue. So it wasn't slotted for any particular purpose. It just went into our general revenues.
So, thanks, Greg. I got that information. I got one more question because I can say something to that down the road. Thanks, Mayor Gibbon, for your patience, and council. Staff learning and development, I'm glad to see that we have this, but I know we're a lot of private industries. I know this speaks to a lot of volumes, but areas. But say a staff member does a course and they do not pass that course, do we pay for it, or do they pay for it out of their pocket?
With staff training, what we do is if a staff member signs up for something and doesn't show up, then they have to cover it. But if they do show up but fail, we still pay for it.
We still pay for it. It's in the private industry, the other way. Okay, thank you.
So, Councillor McLean, just so we're clear, you flagged the HR positions.
Yeah, and thank you. I did.
Okay. Councillor Thiessen?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Bill. I just had a question about the Staff Development Fund. Just going over, I don't have any historical data beyond 2014. Was it always set at $1 million? It seems pretty consistent throughout our budget.
Mayor Given, the staff development budget was pegged at 2.8% of salaries. So depending what the salary level was organization-wide, 2.8% was the Staff Learning Development Council. Over the years, it has gone up as more staff were being hired and more money was being spent on staff salaries, then the staff development would go up. We decided at this point to peg it at the $1 million for the 2015.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Rice?
I can't but help but believe that the job description and the scope of duties in Red Deer, Strathcona, the other ones, the top 4 on your chart, have to be different than ours. The numbers are too large differentiation as to be believable.
Sure. Given to speak to that, again, as I mentioned, we have a different model as how it works. In those other cities, the HR departments there take a much larger role in terms of recruitment, training, those types of things. So what we have done in our department managers do a lot of that work. So the department manager would lead the recruitment process.
So the chart is actually irrelevant.
Well, it's not irrelevant. It just shows that there's different models and different levels of work that are done. But our staff haven't had a staff increase in HR for, well, it's been a long time.
Okay.
So Greg, I mean, essentially, we require more of our managers to do HR tasks, where other municipalities have HR people to do HR tasks.
Correct. And the role of the HR advisors would be to provide more support to the department managers.
Okay. So we have those positions have been flagged by Councillor McLean. And Mr. Sherbeck, was there anything else from your service area?
That would be it.
Okay, well, that's perfect. It's 10:16. We said we'd take a little bit of a break at 10:15. So do that for about 10 minutes, and we'll be back at 25 after. Okay, and so we're ready to get started again, and we're going to start off with the community growth area, and Mr. Roth is there to take us through it. Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Sorry, community living. Thank you.
Yes, the community living area. So we'll start going through this. There we go. In community living, we have developed a common vision and mission for our entire service area. Of course, every department has their own operational goals and objectives. But ultimately, community living essentially provides the services that have significant impact on the residents or our residents' quality of life. And it's through that, having that impact on people's lives, that we also enhance and build our community. We also have common objectives in terms of how we do our business within community living. This ranges from seeing the value in people to working together across departmental boundaries, to really helping people provide the lifestyle that they want, and also to provide exceptional service to our customers. The departments within community living are aquatics and wellness, community social development, culture and heritage, parks operations, recreation and sport, and transit. And I'll walk through each one of these ones as we go. I'll talk a little bit about the department, some of the successes and challenges they have, as well as their budget. Overall, the whole entire service area represents a range in about 27 million to 30 million over the course of this budget cycle in terms of operating costs. And I'll speak to each individual department as to changes in operating costs from 2014 to 2015 as we get into each of the department presentations. First department presentation is in the director's area. This is a pretty small budget with 2 staff in this particular area. And the reason for the decrease in this particular instance is one transfer of a community group funded group, being Grande Prairie Sport Council, has been shifted over to the recreation and sport area. That was added in at a council mid-cycle review, and it has been moved over to that area because that's where it seems to fit the best. So the first area that I'm going to talk about, or the second area I should say that I'm going to talk about, is the Aquatics and Wellness Department. Aquatics and Wellness looks after Eastlink Center, the Leisure Center, and has a small budget line item for the Bear Creek Pool still on the books. Of course, everyone is familiar with these facilities. I want to talk a little bit about some of the successes that they've had. There's been a lot of discussion or debate about some of the challenges in the past few months. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. First off, Eastlink Center has actually hosted a number of very successful events in the past while. The Canadian Junior Racquetball Championship was one of them. Some successful swim meets, some successful skateboarding competitions. We've actually had 2 staff this year that have won awards through Canadian Red Cross for their involvement with swimming and teaching water safety. But I think the biggest impact probably is how people's lives are impacted through the use of our facilities. 2 really good examples of that is the Move It to Lose It campaign, a program that runs every year. And in this particular instance, we had 78 people that signed up for the program. 48 people actually were weighed in. And of those 48 people, over 300 pounds of weight was shed. So that's pretty amazing impact on the lifestyle of our people. One other story that I also got permission to share is actually a bigger impact on the lifestyle of a person. And that in our community, we had an individual who was involved in a car accident a few years ago. And through his story is that he was told he may never walk, and if he does walk, it will always be assisted by canes. Through the use of the walking track at Eastlink Center, as well as work through a personal trainer and under medical supervision, that person was actually this fall able to walk unassisted on the walking track. So that's a pretty cool accomplishment for that person. And it's through facilities like this that we were able to get there. As previous speakers have alluded to, we have made very clear direction to Eastlink Center of freezing the net bottom line operating costs for this budget. As the review is completed early this spring, we will bring the results back to council, but our intent is to stay within the net bottom line to reduce revenues and expenses. So this slide may change. The actual numbers in terms of revenue expenses will probably change as we go, but the net bottom line is what we're focusing on.
See, Councillor Logan has a question.
Thank you. The reality of the expense line, I can understand the reality of the revenue line. I'm not sure whether these figures are based on anything real or not. Could you maybe just give me a bit of an idea of how the revenue line was determined, particularly where we've got a drop in 1 year and a large increase in another year, and whether that's actually realistic?
Yes. So I mean, the revenue line is based upon projections based upon not only the historical but also the feasibility studies that were done with Eastlink Center. As I indicated, though, these will probably be adjusted as we come through our review. We're going to be focusing on the net bottom line. So if there is through our operational review, if we see, for example, $1 million or $2 million decrease in revenue is a realistic amount, we will also expect a realistic amount decreasing in expenses. And that's how we're approaching this operating review, that the net bottom line will stay around the $4 million subsidy mark.
Get it for Councillor Logan.
With the revenue figures, you'll be identifying specific strategies for that, and will that be coming in any way other than, I guess, in reporting to council or council committees?
Yes, that'll come back to council through community living likely, and be reported back through council. Absolutely.
Okay. Director Roth.
The next area within aquatics and wellness is the leisure center. As you know, right now, the leisure center is operating at just the soccer pitch area. Of course, with the proposed capital renovations that will take place, we could see it reopening for operations in 2017. So that's the reason for the increase in operating costs there. And also on this slide is a small amount for the Bear Creek pool. Even though the Bear Creek pool is not operational, we still incur some costs there in terms of utilities and some basic building maintenance. So until further decisions are made of that facility, we do have some minor expenses that we do incur there.
Councillor Radford.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Gary, can you just speak to, I get the general numbers with respect to the leisure center, but I'm asking about from 214 to 215, we're decreasing services costs. So tell me what kind of services and what leads to that reduction.
Thank you, Councillor Radburn. Actually, 214 is a bit of an anomaly in the sense that there were other expenses budgeted for back in the last planning cycle of potentially being operating as an aquatic center should we have renovated it sooner in the cycle. Administratively, we are using some of that funding for another capital project within the city. So it's not a true representation. It is what was budgeted at the time. The actual operating cost will be around that $400,000 mark.
Thank you. Councillor Tarrant.
Thank you, Mayor Given. So I just want to get this straight in my head. So the numbers that are in 15 and 16, does that include just the soccer pitch operatings?
Yes, that's correct. That's just the soccer pitch, as well as overall expenditures for the building, so utilities and insurance and those types of things.
Right. So the increase on the leisure center, so the estimate for the operating is going to be 1.1 million. That's for the pool side.
That is correct.
Okay. If I may just
It's turn.
one more question. So for the Eastlink Center, we have it's a 32% roughly subsidization, right? So about a third of it. Whereas the Leisure Center is projected for about a 71% subsidy. Just can you talk to the rationale behind that?
Well, first off, the leisure center also includes, like I said, the operational costs of the soccer pitch, and some of the overall building costs are factored into that. With increasing the pool operating model, the expenditures that are budgeted for are our best estimate in terms of revenues. The other factor into this too is that the operating model only sees the pool open for 8 hours a day. And so when you're trying to look at your overall building costs and spread that over a subsidy kind of perspective, there's those fixed costs are fixed regardless of how much we're open during a day. So by only being open 8 hours a day on the aquatic side, it only allows us to bring in a fixed amount of revenue and usage for that. Do you follow what I'm saying? It's a lot harder to cover those fixed costs when we're only open for that shorter amount of time.
Okay, Justin, that get the answer you're looking for, Councillor Tarrant?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
For now.
Councillor Clayton?
Thank you, Mayor Given. Just to follow up in that question. However, when we looked at operating for a 16-hour day of the Leisure Center, it was twice as much money. So based on that rationale, it doesn't make sense to me that for an 8-hour day where the schedule will be optimized in programming, which involves optimal revenue for an 8-hour program, that the subsidizing would be at 70% in comparison to the Eastlink Center.
That's Roth?
Yeah, I guess that is correct. Essentially, I can't give you any more additional information. I could, if you have further questions, I could bring that back at a future point in time with more detail around why that is. Essentially, I mean, our building expenses are fairly fixed, and our staffing is fairly fixed for that particular facility.
Councillor Tarrant?
I'd like to flag the Leisure Center.
Leisure
It's
Center,
in its entirety. Yeah.
Leisure Center operating subsidy?
Yes.
Maybe is that the
Yeah,
correct
that
way?
would be good. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe a request for further information or a little bit more explanation. Okay. Okay, Mr. Roth, just got one item there.
So if I may move on to community social development. Community social development really has 5 key services. 4 of them are listed on the screen. The dollar amounts that are listed on the screen are 2014 levels. Of course, you're familiar with FCSS. FCSS is provincially funded dollars, where the city's minimum commitment is to matching with 20% of those dollars. We, as a city, have well exceeded that. In 2014, we were at a ratio of 57% from the province and 43% from the city. Of course, FCSS has been going on for over 35 years in this province. A couple of interesting things coming out of that FCSS piece is that they actually serve over 12,000 clients through the various programs. And out of those 12,000 clients, 88% of them report a very positive change to their personal situation and their lifestyle. FASD is something that's completely funded by the province through the Northwest Regional FASD Partnership. We're in the 7th year of a 10-year plan around that partnership. In 2014, they had 108 adult clients and 12 children, and they operate 6 diagnostic clinics in the area. And in essence, the city is a bit of a broker for that service where they work through community social development. The homelessness initiative is something that the city's been a partner of since 2003. Again, this is part of the province's 10-year plan to end homelessness. This is almost 100% funded by the province as well. In the last couple of years, they have seen over 700, almost 780 adults and 73 children. And the interesting fact about that is that 64% of them stay housed, which is a pretty good success rate when you factor into that some people are obviously harder to house than others. The next program area that they offer is affordable housing, where we, as a city, have received over $19 million in funding from the province. We manage and broker that money through either city-owned projects or projects that are done through private developers. We currently have 95 affordable housing units, and we've also provide affordable home ownership assistance grants for people in our community who are first-time home buyers, and we've done 78 of those over the past number of years. One of the challenges, of course, that we have is that we manage these dollars, but we don't have any extra operational funds to assist that. So city staff do have to manage the contracts that are related to that.
Director Roth, I see Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I know, just a question, I don't know if I'm going to flag it, you might have the numbers. This homelessness initiative, I know is that the one they put on RFP, and mental health got a lot of money? The last term I was on, where a lot of money went to this Fletcher building. Was that the same initiative?
Yes, it goes to RFP, and depending upon the outcome of those RFPs, it depends on which agency is awarded the dollars.
I want to flag this. Well, for question, I just want information on the amount of money that was directed to that Fletcher building, and then they closed it. I'd like to get some information on that, where the money, how it was allocated. I think it's important.
So maybe we can have that as a follow-up item. It's not a budget discussion.
No, but it's, well, yeah.
So you're just, so maybe we can ask administration to send that via email first, and if there's something you'd like to follow up on.
I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's just an information request.
Major information.
And the last area that community social development looks after, that's actually not on the slide, is emergency social services. Certain times when emergencies are declared either in our community or in the area, such as the Slave Lake wildfire situation, these people step up and help out and make sure people are housed and fed and looked after.
I see Councillor Tarrant.
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. Just a question on the FCSS funding. I'm just wondering if we could have a look at what other municipalities across city comparison across Alberta, what their funding ratios are. If you don't have the information now, maybe I'll just flag it, and then we can get that at a later time.
Yeah, that's correct. I don't have that information readily in front of me, but I can get that very quickly.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
So, Councillor Tarrant, you're not intending to flag. So, flagged items are things that we want to vote on that are specific. I want to have that in the budget. I don't want to have that. I want to propose a change. If there's information that you're looking for, I can appreciate that we do have FCSS has an impact on this budget, and I can appreciate that having that information would be helpful to you in voting on that and maybe inform your position in debate. It's not really a flag.
I'd like to flag this item, FCSS funding.
Okay. So we have, we will have an opportunity to discuss FCSS funding, I guess, as it relates to the community groups that present, as well as sort of the overall recommendation. So I just want to make sure that we get so that for staff that are recording it, that we get what it is that we're actually flagging, right? And so is it overall FCSS spending? You kind of have to have a little bit of a strategy of where you want to go with this.
Right. I guess my thoughts were that all the items that were referred were just going to be in, and that there was no flagging on those items. Was my assumption correct on that?
Okay. Yep.
So then I'd like to flag
the overall
FCS,
yes. The referred items. Okay. Yep. Okay.
No other questions, we'll move on. As I indicated, for each area, whenever there's staffing changes, I'll have a slide that will show those staffing changes. Within the Community Social Development Department, there's only one staffing change, and that was the Customer Service Administration Assistant. So this is the person who looks after administration and is basically the receptionist in the department. Has been a temporary employee for a number of years, and it is proposed to convert that position to a full-time established in 2018.
Councillor Radburn?
Am I looking at FCSS administration? So where is this in our big binder? Please.
So of course, FCSS is spread out through a number of different areas, and I believe that is sitting in administration. So looking at the overall totals, and that is for all the various program areas put together, there is an increase in budget primarily for that position as well as overall operating costs. A couple of other things that are factored into this is any increases in community group funding through FCSS or community social development related funds are also reflected in this budget. One of those is a $300,000 grant, a one-time grant sitting in 2015. So that's why you'll see 2015 amount go up and then back down in 2016. The other thing that's also factored into this is also some operating costs for the Young Offenders Center. Staff have put together a base budget for assuming the utilities and building maintenance as well as some janitorial over there. And that's about $110,000 in 2015, going up to $130,000 in 2018. That covers our fixed costs in terms of utilities, insurance, etc., as well as janitorial. The future use of that building, of course, will come back through a committee report where we'll outline a process for how we will look at what's going to go into that building and outline how we're going to move forward with that one. I can move on to culture and heritage.
See a question, Councillor Radburn?
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Gary, I'm looking at home support services. 214 to 215. We have an increase of significant increase in salaries. Give me more information on that, please.
As I understand it, the changes in salaries there were primarily just it was more of a reflection of changes in classification versus increases in numbers of hours. There were some increases in hours, but it's also changes in how they're set up within the QP agreement. If you need more information, I can give you more detail at a later point.
I'd like to flag that, Mayor Given, please.
Okay. So, Councillor Radburn, you're going to flag the salaries in home support?
Services, please.
Okay. See also Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Can you go back to your last slide, Director Ra? Can you give me a little bit more explanation on the expense line? And you said there was a grant in 2015. Can you just give me a bit more explanation on the expense line on that slide?
So all the community group, much of the community group funding actually falls within community social development. A lot of that is related to FCSS or community social impact funding. In 2015, there's a $300,000 grant funding request from a community group for a capital item, and that was also referred by Council Committee of the Whole. So that's why you see that amount go up considerably in 2015, and then it drops down a little bit for 2016.
Just to be clear, that's the PARDS grant.
It's the PARDS grant.
Oh.
It's a one-time request that
Yeah.
we built into this.
So, sorry, can I flag that for further discussion?
The PARDS grant?
Yeah, thank you.
And Councillor O'Toole?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Given. I just got a question, Gary. I know community social development the city's been picking up a lot of the costs. Government's been kind of slacking off a little bit in the current recent years. Has there been any indication in the last year or so? Now, I know we've had a couple different premiers in the last 6 months, but is there any indication recently that there may be an incline to funds help support more? Have you had any conversation with any of the departments?
Mr. Roth?
It's my understanding there's been some unofficial discussion that FCSS funding would be increasing in future years, but there's nothing been formally announced by the province.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, is there anything else, Director Roth?
So we can move on to culture and heritage then. So the culture and heritage department, of course, looks after the museum, the heritage village down there, Heritage Discovery Center at Center 2000, the Mount Rose Cultural Center, as well as the Forbes Homestead site. They also fund various community groups and liaise with them, and that includes groups like the Live Theater, Center for Creative Arts, Peace Library System, Public Library, and the Art Gallery of Grande Prairie. Of course, they also manage various grants and awards through, such as the Arts Development Funding. Just a couple of successes to highlight from them is that if you add together the museum visits plus all the visits from the various community groups that they fund, it comes out to over 756,000 visits. And so that represents a fairly significant impact into people's lives within our community. One of the other attendance numbers that I have here is, and I'm sure your council is well aware, is that attendance in our museum this year has gone up drastically. We're up to over 17,000 visits from June to September. When you compare that to the same time last year, we were under 7,000 visits. So that's a success of some changes to marketing and how we approach things down there. Looking more specifically at their staffing requests, we have a couple of staffing changes in this area. The first one is adding a cultural services coordinator / MCC event coordinator. This is a brand new position. The cultural services coordinator is something that was identified in the cultural master plan, and we've instead of just hiring a cultural coordinator, we've combined it with some other duties at the Montrose Cultural Center that are currently contracted services, and looking at trying to find the best way to bundle some work together to be the most efficient as possible. Then the other thing that Culture and Heritage does do, which I should have mentioned on my previous slide, is that they also look after the custodial services for a number of city facilities. That started in the sense that they had their own custodial team at Montrose Cultural Center. Since then, they now look after custodial at City Hall, as well as Community Social Development Office, as well as Muskasiki Park and at the museum. That crew of custodial workers is currently temporary staff, and we don't anticipate that work would ever go away. We still need to clean our facilities. So we are proposing a conversion of the 4 of those positions over the 4 years so that we can properly reflect them as full-time established positions.
We have a question from Councillor Logan.
And indeed, it is a question. I'm not flagging anything, but I was hoping that we could have some sort of an email circulation on the Cultural Services Coordinator job description and function.
Absolutely.
Councillor Logan.